It's important to understand how equipment is installed on network and server cabinets. You might also hear these referred to as racks, but for the purpose of this lesson, we'll call them cabinets. Both network and server cabinets work well for mounting routers, switches, and other equipment. It might seem self-explanatory, but there are best practices you should follow when you select your cabinet. Oftentimes, a small organization only has a handful of things that need to be mounted, so they might just buy one cabinet. Large organizations and data centers, though, spend a lot of time picking the right cabinet for the right equipment. Let's discuss each type of cabinet. Network cabinets are usually used for mounting routers, patch panels, switches, and other networking accessories. Network cabinets are usually more shallow than server cabinets, usually less than 31 inches deep. They often have a glass or clear plastic front door. The equipment that's mounted on network cabinets doesn't generate as much heat as the types of equipment that are mounted on server cabinets. Server cabinets are mostly used for servers, power supplies, monitors, or similar equipment. These things definitely generate a lot of heat. Server cabinets are usually larger, measuring about 24 inches wide and 36 inches deep. They usually have a perforated front and rear to allow airflow all around. This is very important to protect against overheating. Now, when you buy mountable equipment like a server, router, network switch, and so on, you'll see references to 1U, 2U, or maybe even 6U. What that's referring to is the mount's height. Most often, you'll see it referred to as U, but sometimes as RU, which is rack unit. The Electronic Industries Alliance, or EIA, has defined this as the standard. The height of 1U is 1.75 inches, or about 44 millimeters. So a server that's considered 2U would be 3.5 inches. One that's 6U would be 10.5 inches. When planning for the equipment you want, it's important to know ahead of time the size you need. The width of most rack mount equipment is standard 19 inches, but some could be 23 inches or more. Other times, equipment isn't wide enough, so it might come with extension brackets that mount into a standard 19-inch cabinet. Most network switches and routers are mounted on server racks and remain stationary, but some equipment, typically servers, have rails mounted to the sides so that they can slide in and out. This is so that the equipment can be worked on without undoing the screws. It's also important to note that cabinets usually have locks on the doors to keep people from either accessing equipment or accidentally turning something off. Now let's look at some equipment in LabSim that's mounted on a rack. We just got done talking about best practices, but in this scenario we only have a few pieces of server and network equipment, so all of it's mounted on the same rack. Here on top is our router. I'll select it, and when I do, it shows up down here. I'll click on the Details link and it displays a larger image. I can view the front and back. I can also view the specifications to learn more about this particular piece of equipment. Next is a switch. I can look at its details by clicking on the back and zooming in to see the model. Now we have the patch panel. I'm going to zoom in here so we can read these labels. This one here says OFF1, abbreviated for Office 1. Let me unplug this and plug it in over here for a second. Notice up here that there's a light indicator and it's off. It went off when I unplugged it from Office 1. I'll plug it back into Office 1 and the light comes back on. This lets me know that there's something on the other end that's plugged in. Let me unplug it again and just plug it in here. Now let's jump over to the Office 1 computer and look at it for a second. Down here, it's telling me that there's no internet access. Well, that's because I unplugged it from the patch panel. How can I be sure? Let's plug it back in and see. I'll go back to the networking hardware and plug it back into the Office 1 port. My light is back on. I go back over to the Office 1 computer, and sure enough, if you look here, it says that we're connected. Next is a fiber optic patch panel. Below the patch panel is a 1U server. Remember that 1U means it's 1 3/4 of an inch thick. Each of these are hot swappable hard drives. There are 4 of them. Hot swappable means that if you follow proper procedures, you can change the drives while the server is turned on and running. That's beyond the scope of this demo, but I wanted to point that out. The server below is 2U, and this one has 8 hot swappable drives. Let's move down a little bit. Now we have an uninterruptible power supply, or UPS, and below that is a wireless controller. Notice how narrow the controller is. There are extensions that allow it to be mounted like anything else. Before ending this demo, I want to mention a few real-life situations that are more than likely to pop up. We talked about servers being mounted on rails. When you pull a server out, make sure that the networking cables aren't hung up on something. Otherwise, you might unplug them accidentally. Often, the little wire clamps that go over the plugs to keep them from coming loose get unplugged. You can also see all these wires on the backside of the punch-down block. When working on equipment, be careful not to accidentally pull any of these loose either. If one does come loose, you basically have to remove the mounting screws from the front of the cabinet to get your punch-down tool in there again. If you or a coworker has been working on equipment like this, and you suddenly get a ticket request for someone that doesn't have network connectivity, you might want to check here as one of your first troubleshooting steps. I should also mention that with most organizations, there's a window of time when they work on mounted networking equipment like this, in case something goes wrong. One former test-out student works for a large data center, and they only work on mounted equipment between the hours of 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. Unless it's an emergency, they don't even touch it outside of this. Now, a lot of what we looked at might not be within the scope of your job title, but it's good to know how things are connected, especially when it comes to troubleshooting. And that'll wrap up this demo. In this demo, we looked at network and server cabinets. We discussed the size and shape of these cabinets and the differences between the two. We also discussed some of the basic equipment you might find in a typical small organization.